Hi, everyone. Here you are again, and here we are again for our fourth preview of the VIEW sessions that we're doing during this month before the VIEW conference. My name is Maria Elena Gutierrez. I am the director of the VIEW conference, and it is a huge honor to introduce tonight's presentation. Tonight we're going to be featuring Gitanjali Rao, and in a conversation with Aram Yakubian. But before I introduce them, I wanted to do the usual reminders and the usual housekeeping announcements. So, as you know by now, because you've been hearing me tell you, that VIEW Conference 2021 will be coming to you from the 17th to the 22nd of October here in beautiful Turin, Italy. We hope to bring both a physical and a virtual VIEW conference. And we truly hope that many of you will join us in Italy. So, before I get too deep into the conversation, I wanted to take a minute to thank our incredible team for helping make this event possible. Obviously, a huge thank you to our partners, Netflix and the OGR, Torino. In particular, I want to send a huge thank you to Olivier Moreau at Netflix for all his hard work in helping us bring this very special session tonight. The VIEW Conference 2021 edition is now available on demand. So if you're curious about what that looked like, you can go and check it out on our website. We have over 120 presentations, workshops, and masterclass to choose from, including a presentation by Ed Catmull and many other amazing speakers. So do check that out. And one last announcement, and I think this is the first time I'm doing it, but I think in times of need, you need to ask the community to support you. Now, you know that VIEW Conference is a nonprofit cultural association. And for this event that we are hosting outside of the VIEW Conference, we rely on the support of our community, of our donors. We don't have a particular sponsor for this event. So if you like what you see, the events are free, and you want to send a donation, that is also on the website. Even $5 would help us. So whatever you send, we will be delighted with that. Now, tonight, I'm really proud and honored to introduce Bombay Rose. The movie is really, really beautiful, and we highly recommend that you see it when it will come out. I am told that it will be coming out on March 8th, International Women's Day, in 189 countries. So make sure you check it out. Well, with that in mind, to the introductions. Award-winning director, Gitanjali Rao, is truly a splendid storyteller. She delights in crafting her unique vision of culture and in bringing it to the world. She's a fine art graduate from the Sir J.J. Institute in Mumbai. She first earned international recognition in 2006 when her beautiful animated short, Printed Rainbow, won 3 awards at the Cannes International Critics Week. Since then, her movies have earned many, many awards at festivals. Bombay Rose is her first animated feature. It's painted frame by frame. It combines gritty reality with a gorgeous dream world, which is inspired by Indian folk art. Bombay Rose is astonishingly beautiful profound, and filled with unexpected wonder. So I truly hope that you will see the movie. And now I would like to introduce our fabulous moderator, Aram Yakubian. Aram is director of original content at Netflix. He has worked at Netflix for over 7 years. And during this time, he has demonstrated his commitment to bringing top-notch family content to the screen. In fact, we owe to him the fact that we will be able to see through Netflix Bombay Rose. Aram is responsible for looking after development and production of animated features at Netflix in close collaboration with independent studios all over the world. So before I turn the floor over to our fabulous speakers, I want to make one last announcement, which is to our audience. Please send your questions for our guests on the platform and send them now or through the presentation. Please don't wait until the end. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Well, welcome, Gitanjali, and welcome, Aram. It's really great to have you. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Elena.
Yeah, thank you, Verena, for a lovely introduction. And I don't think we need to talk anything more. And over to you, Aram. And yeah, let's have a lovely evening discussing Bombay Rose and other things animation.
Absolutely. Really looking forward to chatting with you, Gitanjali, about your career, your film, animation in general. And just a reminder, as Maria Elena said, please submit questions throughout. We'll leave some time at the end for a Q&A and go through some of the questions from the guests. And thank you to the PreVIEW conference and all the sponsors for having us. So Gitanjali, as Marina Elena implied, it's been a long time coming for your first feature film, since your award-winning debut short, Printed Rainbow. It's been a wonderful journey to watch from afar, and we're so excited for Bombay Rose and to talk more about that today. I'd love to hear more about when you knew you wanted to work in animation and how that dream became a reality.
Yeah, sure. It's a long time back. I just realized I've completed about 27 years in animation. And how it all started was quite unique, because this was 1994, at a time when there was no internet. And I was just passing out from my art college. And I was quite sure I was studying applied art, and I was supposed to get into advertising. But at that time, I was quite sure I did not want to do advertising. I wanted to do filmmaking in some way or the other. And my situation at home was such that I could not study cinema. I had to get down to working in the field and earning and keeping and supporting myself. And interestingly, it didn't bog me down. A lot of us at that time were in that same predicament. India was a much poorer country back then. And beyond graduation, further studies was quite a luxury. So I happened to go to a short film festival, and which happened in Bombay, and it was purely for shorts, animation, and documentaries. And I watched an entire retrospective of a Polish animator, Jerzy Kucia's works, and it remained with me forever, because his films made me realize that if I can draw and if I love cinema, then the two come together in animation. And the kind of storytelling he had was very real, was very gritty, was extremely psychologically, it affected me. And it was something to do with the age at which you feel very confident that if you want to pursue something, you just get onto a job which will lead you somewhere there. And I started working in an animation studio, one of the best animation studios in India, called Ram Mohan Biographics. Ram Mohan is considered the Walt Disney of animation in India. He passed away sadly last year, but he was there forever. And just about all the animators in India have learned animation from him, because none of us could really afford education in animation. There were very few art schools. There were very few animation schools at that time. So we learned on the job. And that I was just one of them, learning on the job. And slowly, after 2 years, I learned the craft, and at some point decided that this commercial animation, we were at Ramon Biographies, we were doing a lot of very Disney-looking animation. And for me, I wanted to break out into my own style. And so I started working on my own films along with working in the industry. And I was never sure, even for the first 3 or 4 years, whether I'm going to pursue this hobby. But yes, it became my passion, my livelihood. I realized that if I want to tell stories through cinema, animation is the best way to tell it, because you can do a lot more. That is what I feel. You can do a lot more in animation than you can do in live action. And that's probably because I learned the craft under a master, and I'm able to practice it now to make the films that I say the things that I would like to.
I'd love to talk about that a little bit more of kind of the uniqueness of animation and what additional tools it provides to be able to tell stories that you may not be able to tell in live action, or even stories that can be told in live action, but in some ways become enhanced in animation. Do you have a specific approach or a specific philosophy of how to make the most out of this medium or this tool in the stories that you're passionate about telling?
Absolutely. In fact, when we first get into animation, the thing we ask ourselves, and we are taught to ask ourselves, is if this can be done in live action, then why do it in animation? And that is a very nice space to come from. And I feel there is definitely a space of fantasy and science fiction which animation can get into, which live action finds it very difficult to get into. And that is a part of animation, visual effects, VFX, that the industry has progressed into. But for me, that is only one side of the way animation can do something that live action cannot. My take in what animation can do, which live action cannot, for me, then defines in my filmmaking as going into the mind or the psyche of my characters. This is something, of course, live action can do, but I can literally go into the mind of my character and look at things from their point of view. Like in the case of Bombay Rose, I have gone into the rose, and I take the audience through the journey that the rose would be taking through its point of view. So these are things I feel are impossible in animation, in live action. They're probably not impossible in live action, but the way we start thinking as animators is to think differently, think things in a way like for me, it's to do with the fantasy, not fantasy of the science fiction kind, but fantasy of what a human mind would like to fantasize about. And those are the fantasies, the dreams, the surreal, the space which the human mind gets into, are my pursuit of where I use animation to go into these spaces, to navigate away from reality and go into spaces that are created by the mind. That, I feel, when you have a medium like animation, your audience goes very easily from reality into that mind space. But if you're dealing with live action, it takes a lot more effort to go very easily from reality into the fantasy world. And in a film like Bombay Rose, I really stretch it to the point where the audience is almost confused whether they are in the dream world of the character or whether they are in reality. And that, to me, is very special about animation, and especially 2D hand-drawn animation. Like the earlier Netflix film, I Lost My Body. That's a perfect example of how you can get under the skin of an element and look at life through hand-drawn 2D animation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I Lost My Body is a great example of that, but Bombay Rose as well, of telling really kind of grounded stories that in a sense can live in a live action world, but really kind of heightening it in a way that you can truly only do in animation. And as you described that, I found anything is possible in animation. You can kind of describe any abstract thought or fantasy in a beautiful way, as you have done in Bombay Rose. So really excited that this is the medium that you've taken on as your choice and telling your beautiful stories in that way. And you had such a successful run with your short films. We were talking about Printed Rainbow earlier. That one has won many awards. Of course, you had a few others after that. And of course, now jumping into your first feature film in Bombay Rose, what inspired that jump into kind of full-length feature film, and what were some of the challenges or some of the opportunities as well that you found in this extended format?
In animation, short film is unlike in live action. Usually in live action, you make a short film because you are learning to make a feature film. That is the usual trajectory or the journey of a filmmaker. In animation, it is slightly different because there are a lot of animators in this world who have only made short films and excellent short films, and they develop their style and their language through the short films. And feature film is something that is quite separate from this. However, my short films have always been in festivals along with live action films. They have done better in festivals like Cannes or Venice rather than, say, Annecy or very animation-specific festivals. They have been there also. But they have shared a space of cinema as taken seriously, in which it's not a cartoon film, it becomes an animation film. So I traversed that world a lot more than just the animation world. And like I told you, it was always my ambition to make films. Animation was just the medium that I chose and learned and followed. But cinema in its entirety was something that has always been my pursuit, my learning and self-taught, and wanting to create something within it. And animation becomes just a tool, just a medium. But of course, my cinema comes, the fact that I was in these live action film festivals, the first question was, when are you making a feature film? And I was not ready to make a feature film in 2006 when Printed Rainbow won all the awards, because I was quite happy in the world of shorts. It took me 3 years to make that film. So the effort that goes into a short is much more than a feature film. And I was quite content being like that for the next few years. And then slowly I started exploring the medium of features. And the wish to tell a longer story was the driving force for me to then get into feature animation. That was a very difficult leap, and it had a lot of challenges. The first thing is the fact that I've done a lot of short advertising work and short films, then when you get onto features, you realize you want to tell a story, but you have no idea how to tell a story in a long format. Because you keep, especially someone like me, I am not much of a writer. I can't write scripts. For me, it's very easy to draw a storyboard of a film and then make the film, which is how I made my shorts. And the challenge about features is you have to write a script and then you have to find a financing and then make a film. So I realized it is going to help me learn the craft along the way as I pursue feature film. So Bombay Rose is my first feature film that I completed. It's not the first feature film that I started. I started 2 other feature films which never finished. So they gave me a lot of learning experience as to how to go about making a feature. And the confidence of people who are financing your film is also not much when you're making a feature film, because they know you can do a short film well, but that does not assure them that you can make a feature well. And so this is something I was facing when, as a challenge, finding a finance for the film. And that's where I came up with the idea that what if I take one of the stories of my feature and make a short film out of it to show my finances, or to show people that this kind of storytelling works. And so I took one story and made a short film called True Love Story in 2014. And that, again, was selected in Cannes, and it was quite successful. It was actually made as a pitch to be able to raise finance for the feature film. And it worked in a way. I could convince people, and that film had no words spoken at all. It was a complete visual storytelling, just like my film, Printed Rainbow. And yet the story and the emotions came out with simply the 2D hand-painted animation. So that helped me then find finance for my feature. But I was also quite prepared that if I cannot find finance for the feature, I will make 3 short stories of the 3 stories which come together to make the feature. So I had that in mind also, and I pursued the feature. And at the point where I did find the finances, I was very lucky. Both my producers, the French Le Film DC and the Indian Cinestan, did not want to change my idea at all. They were very happy with the script that I'd written, with the animatics that I'd done, with the short film that I had presented to them. Having done all this, my creativity they gave me a free hand with the creativity. And at that point I said, okay, if they have trust in me, then I'm going to go forward and I'm going to make this film. So each time it was, let's try this, let's try that. Something works, something else doesn't work. Then you have a plan B. And somewhere along with all that, the film finished. As I said, finishing a film is far more challenging than starting a film. And then, getting a film to be released and for people to watch it is the next challenge, which I am at, and which, thanks to Netflix, we are going online. So of the many stages, going from short to feature, I have to admit a lot of people led me along the way with pumping in the confidence to make it.
Fantastic. And I'm excited to talk about Bombay Rose much further specifically. But before we do, we'd love to play our first clip, which is the trailer of the film, to set a little bit of context, and then we can dive a little bit deeper. I think it'll be playing just in a second.
सपना तो कहीं भी देख सकते हैं, फिर समंदर क्यों?
वह सपनों की सीमा नहीं रहती।
कैसा दिया?
100 रुपए के 10।
Who is this young lady with you?
It's Miss D'Souza. I wish to hear nothing except English in your English class.
दीदी, इसने बिल्ली को बचाया, मैंने इसको बचाया। ये भी हीरो, मैं भी हीरो।
छोकरी से दूर रहने का तेरे लिए नहीं है।
भैया, अरे रुको, सुनो, सुनो।
मैं बर्बाद कर देगा तेरे को, तेरा पूरा फैमिली को।
Clearly, in watching that, Bombay Rose is not the most conventional animated, family CG film that you'd see these days. And as you described, your films have had, and short films have had so much success in indie, in live action festivals, and in that circuit and in that audience. I'm curious to know more about what inspired Bombay Rose. Obviously, this is an idea that you've had for a long time, and you proved out with your short. And I'd love to know more about why is this the story, the first story, or maybe not necessarily the first because you had tried a few other, but really one of the first stories that you were excited to tell as your debut feature film.
The story just came to me from being with and watching people all around me, living in a city. I'm born and brought up in Bombay. I have never really lived anywhere else. And to me, an honest film is a film wherein you talk about something that you know. You tell stories about things that are familiar to you and that affect you. And the life of people living on the streets in Bombay has been something that I encountered on a daily basis when I would go to college, when I would go to work. You travel in the local trains. The people that you see around you, the girls who sell these flowers and trinkets, I used to be intrigued about them, their lives, the boys who sell flowers also, and the way they would flirt with each other. What goes on in their mind? How do they live their lives? And then you read a lot of things. I used to work in an NGO during the riots that happened in Bombay. So I was visiting the slums, visiting people living on the streets, understanding where they come from, the problems of being a migrant, and the way the city is built by them. They clean the city, but they don't really have voting rights. And all this was something that was something that I was surrounded with. And I started finding the characters, the people living these lives interesting, their stories interesting. And somewhere I felt if my medium is animation, and this I would like to tell their stories instead of telling stories which are usually success stories. And I've never been too attracted to the mainstream, and for me it's always been like try and do something which other people are not doing. And these stories were something that was not being told enough in especially in a place like Bollywood, where it is all very too much of a make believe. So the stories of these many girls that I saw, and these many boys that I saw, and these many women that you saw who used to be working at a certain time when things were different, and they struggle to live their lives now. These survival stories became very important. And for me, the medium of animation then allowed me to see these stories of these people like you would see them if you were stuck in a traffic jam, which in a place like Bombay, in a three-wheeler like an auto rickshaw or a taxi or a bus, or sometimes a double-decker bus or a local train, you're stuck for hours. And the street life of people is something you can see very intimately. And so for me, this point of view was very interesting, where you can smell the fumes, where you're in the middle of things and looking at it, not looking at it from an external point of view and being judgmental, but actually being inside of it and living it. So in that sense, it's a very documentary way of making a film. And for me, what was interesting is to then get the documentation, the reality, things which are never done in animation. And my stories with these characters, actually the two films that I could not make had the same characters, had the same hero and heroine. And I just pursued them. The stories can change, but these people, this Kamala and Salim, just lived with me for so many years that I had to make a film about them. And actually the story changed by the time I reached Bombay Rose. But these are very universal stories. Their story could be the story of any two people in the city. And I felt it is something I know. It is something I would like to say. And I wanted to bring in a lot of artistry, because here you're talking about poverty. And the poverty is the real part of it. But the richness is in the way they survive through things, in the way they think about things. So the richness comes from the animation, from the art styles that I use. And I juxtapose the two things to then finally tell the story.
Awesome. And it really comes through. It definitely, in watching the film, I felt like I was transported directly to Mumbai. You mentioned the experience one would have stuck in a traffic jam in Mumbai. I think I've spent more time in Mumbai traffic than I've spent in Mumbai as a whole. But truly in watching the film, the colors, the textures, the sounds, it's interesting because though the look is very stylized, it still is a very visceral experience that felt very unique to India, and specific to Bombay, making it such a really transporting experience. And we haven't seen a lot of longer format 2D animation in India outside of what's programmed for kids TV. Given it's such a local, such a specific story, was it really important for you to make this with a studio in India? Obviously, there's a wealth of 2D studios around the world, but not having seen so much of that in India just yet, how important was telling that story, from those voices?
It was. The story came to me very organically from where I live and what I see. The characters, like for example, let's say the way the character moves, the way Kamala, the main protagonist, the way she moves, she is a young woman. She is shy. She is demure. The way she's very graceful, and the way she weaves her garlands. Now, these gestures are very, very real and very, very natural. And as a rule in my animation films, I do not video record action and give it to my animators. I've never done that. I encourage my animators to feel the movement themselves, even if they're men, to feel the way a woman would move. And if they're women and animating a male character, they have to feel it. They have to look into the mirror and recreate it like the old style. And to keep so that there is a lot of feeling inside the movements that are painted frame by frame. So to get this kind of animation, I knew there is a lot of 2D animation talent in India, but we have also been trying to follow the conventional Disney style of animation with anticipation. And I've studied it myself, and it helps a lot. But animators find it very difficult to get out of that and to get into a personal style that I have. Yet I could manage that with my animators because I felt my animators, I mean the Indian studio that I was working in with the Indian animators. The reason being that half the work is done. They know how a woman moves. All they have to learn is how to do it in my style. And that is something, if I was working with a studio abroad, because this was a possibility in a co-production, it would have made sense if I could do the animation in France or Germany, a part of it at least, and the rest here, to make the co-production work better. But there was no way I could communicate these things to those animators. Their style is beautiful, but when a French animator animates, especially in 2D, the movements are of a French person. And those are very slightly different from a German person, but hugely different from the way an Indian person moves. And for me, this was very important, that it should look like, after 10 minutes of watching the film, people should forget that it's an animation film. So to keep this Indianness intact, I felt I'm doing myself and the studio a service by just getting people who know India or who know Bombay and who know the pulse of the place, who know how people move. And then was a big process of teaching them how to adapt that to my style of animation. Yet that was something I could tackle. This part was just simply done. And I feel even with my next films, I would like to work with that team because over 2 years, I honed their talent in such a way that they understood what I want. My style can probably change, the graphic style can change, but essentially the movement of a human being will more or less remain the way I see it. So if tomorrow, if I was making a French film with French characters, I would work with French animators. They would do justice to it much more than my team out here.
Thank you. And I'd love to talk to you more about the kind of opportunity in animation in India, as well as the working relationship with Paperboat. But before we do, can we play one more, our next clip to show a little bit more from the film?
Sure.
तारा तुम्हारे नाक में दम कर देगी।
अरे समीर एक नाक में दम करता है, वो दूसरे नाक में दम करेगी। करने दो, बच्चे तो है।
रेवा नैनों में रहे नदिया नैनों में रहे रंग सुनाए बीती कहानी गंध कभी ना होवे पुरानी उंगली पकड़ कर हम खुशबू के बीते कल में चले रेवा नैनों में रहे
Oh, feels like yesterday. Remember those wrinkles on his forehead? Gurudat, shrouded in the cloak of smoke. Oh my, how he would make us all wish we were that cigarette dangling from his lips. And Shakila, I don't blame you for having a crush on her, but how could you? She of 2 left feet? No, of course, I'm not jealous. Curious I am, yes.
That was wonderful. And Gitanjali, earlier you talked about kind of your approach to filmmaking, how you're able to visualize the films and leaning into kind of storyboarding it out as your primary tool of working through your story ideas. And here we saw, beautiful early drawings and early images from the film, and obviously what they ultimately turned up in animation. Can you talk us through a little bit more about your creative process with this film?
Yeah, this for me is the most important process of getting the entire film down to the animatics. And I do it alone by myself, single-handedly, because as I told you, for me, that is the most creative part of how the film will look, how it will sound, how it will be paced, everything. And because I was getting from the medium of shorts to features, I thought this was really, really the most important key stage of filmmaking. And all animators would tell you this. I choose to do it myself because I can. I know animation and I know how to draw. And I want to be able to put down my visualization in paper in such a way that an entire team can follow it. And today I would even think about it as in a way that people can follow it virtually. So this is the crux of the filmmaking that 1 year I spent on making the storyboards, but this was also overlapped with the time that my co-producers were signing their contract. It took them a year, and I utilized that time to make the storyboard by myself and to put it down to this 90-minute film. And based on that, again, it gave the confidence to the producers in terms of financing the film. And also when I went to Paperboat Studio, when I showed them this, they knew it was a very difficult film. They knew it would be a tough way to crack it. And they have been my friends for much longer than when I started working with them. We are contemporaries as filmmakers. Soumitra Ranade, the chairperson of Paperboat, he's a live action filmmaker. And his wife is an animation filmmaker whose film they had made. And that's why it gave me the confidence to go to them with this film. So it was, the creative process was a complete experiment. They had never done a film like this before. I had never worked with a team before. And yet, what was clear was this is what we need to create. And that, I think, is very, very important in any stage of filmmaking. As long as you have everything, a blueprint of an idea completely there, then making a film out of it is just about solving the problems. So how we did it eventually was, me as a person, I start my first frame, it is painted, and then I make my next one, which is also painted, and the third one, which is also painted, and nobody else can do that. It is a very individual style of working. So how do we break it down to a team of people doing it? And how we sorted it out, and this is the talent of Paperboat being not a very big studio which goes with a regular pipeline, but a very niche, small, experimenting, adventurous studio. How they cracked it for me was, we don't have people who know animation and who know how to paint. We have people who know animation and they can draw. Let's use another bunch of people who can paint and they need not know animation. And that is how we sorted out the two things. And then somewhere in between, we felt there was a disconnect between these two teams. One team was extremely talented, experienced animators doing line drawing, and another was a very raw, fresh college graduate intern talent, which was ready to paint every frame without asking why. And then we kind of bridged it together by getting another set of animators who would demarcate where the light and the shadow falls. And over a period of 3 months, we tested this out. It kind of worked. And then we followed this as a technique to make the film. So yeah, it was the first. It was a one-off. And now that we have figured out the technique, we all want to make another film because we feel the first Bombay Rose was just a learning point. And what a learning point. My creative team, when they started, I had to hold their hand. And by the end of 2 years, there was a time when I used to say, oh, this looks perfect. They would say, no, there is a little more work left to make it even better than this. So they had gone beyond my rate of satisfaction. They were doing better work than I could have done myself or I could have expected from them.
And so much of the DNA of your films, and clearly what has influenced your partnerships and how you work, is that unique look that your films and your projects have. as you mentioned, they're painted frame by frame, which really presents such a personal kind of organic style to the stories that you're telling. I'd love to hear more about what is the inspiration for that look and ultimately why that has become the primary medium within animation that you've chosen to tell your stories.
I get bored of following just one style of animation. I also come from a background of advertising, wherein we used to learn to imitate just about any animator's good style of animation and make films in that. That became my expertise, to the extent that I realized I don't have a language of my own. And as I developed it, I realized my language is being able to do different kinds of animation. And I love doing it also. When I look at a miniature painting, I start imagining a painting. I start imagining how it would look if it was animated, how it would move. And this is not just by, taking it on flash and moving things. For me, I go into the mind space. Even if I looked at a painting by Picasso or by Van Gogh, for me, it would move in the way I can move it in animation. And I should know enough animation to be able to move that and not be restricted by software. Because that's what happens when you are doing 3D animation. You do get restricted by software. I feel 2D animation is much more hard work, but you can actually realize just about anything by painting it and making it move. So my styles have come from the miniature painting style in India, which is very, very famous. So now I wanted to tell a story in the miniature style, but I get to make only one feature film, right? So this is a style which I love to, which I want to animate. And this is the story that I'm telling. How about making the two things come together cleverly, convincingly, and make it part of the story? And I think I've done that. It becomes a game eventually. How convincingly can you use the maximum number of styles and then put it homogeneously into one story so that people feel what they're watching is not something they've seen ever before. But within it, there should not be any conflict where they say, oh, I don't understand this. I don't understand this movement. So I choose styles which are quite realistic. And I do the animation in which the audience is not alienated by its graphic hardness. In that sense, they still look like people. They still have form and flesh. And like the stretch and squash in Disney is always there. In my films, the weight and the complexion and the light on them is always there. It keeps them real.
Fantastic. And you were speaking to it a little bit earlier, but with your short films, working alone for so much of that and being able to really kind of have your singular vision and ultimately be responsible, which gives you kind of that freedom to tell the story in exactly the way that you want to. But of course, as we know, and as you've learned with feature film, it is such a collaborative process. You alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I would love to chat a little bit more of how you were able to balance that singular vision that you have, that point of view that you have, but still kind of collaborating with all of the incredible talent at Paperboat. What challenges that can present and how you were able to overcome them, as well as the different hats that you wore, which presumably, given your history of working pretty independently, you also wore many hats on this film as well.
The thing is, as I told you, it was an experiment, and as you know very well, it is very difficult for me to go from just about doing everything myself and to work with a team. However, the fact that I've done everything myself in my short films is because I didn't have the finance to hire anyone. I would have loved to, but I couldn't. Therefore, I learned each and every craft so that I can get by independently making that film. The moment it comes onto a feature, of course, it is extremely collaborative. And for me, I divide it into two main collaborative efforts. One is with the producers and the people who are supporting the film, and the other is with my artists and the studio. And what I did overcome and learn was to work in tandem with my artists and get the animation from them. And this was essentially by keeping the storyboard very, very specific. If you notice the storyboard drawings, even the emotions and the way the body is held, all of that is put in such a way that even I can remember it a year and a half from now and guide my animators to do it. that was the most pleasurable part of making the film. Getting people to understand what you're doing and then waiting and patiently seeing them grow as artists and make that style their own. The other side was to deal creatively with the producers. And that for me was made easy because I had Deborah Sathe from Sinistan. She was just like me. So she was a fighter and she would not stop at anything. And I was doing all my fights and wars in making the film. And she was seeing to it that it gets where it has to get. So this kind of a partnership, and we used to fight a lot. And yet we were absolutely in love with each other and inseparable when it came to, where the film goes. So in that sense, as a woman working with other women and even with men, somewhere it was a very emotional way of working with people. Whereas when it came to the animation, I think I was extremely professional. And so this, to me, the two balance was something I discovered in the film. And of course, the learning never ends. But it was not as easy as I would have taken it for granted. It still comes in my way, where all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm alone with things and I become defensive. And it has its pros and cons. One is, yes, you can make your film yourself. The other is you won't let anybody else do anything to your film and become a control freak. But I kind of stayed out of it. There was a friend animator who advised me, a woman, of course. When I approached her, she was my senior, and I said, this is what I'm getting into. Any advice? She said, just one advice. Tell your animators what they have to do. Never tell them how they have to do it. And that kind of stayed with me. Not just my animators, anybody that you work with, you tell them what you want and what you want them to do, but not how they're going to do, because then it becomes nagging, then it becomes controlling, then it becomes like, you have to do it only this way and there's no other way to do it. And that helped. Everybody found out their own way of solving the problems and doing the animation the way they wanted to. And the studio let everybody very organically find their own way. Some of them are working on Flash, some of them are making animation drawings on Corel Painter, some on Photoshop, whatever you like, as long as the final file is in the same format and goes to the next department. So that I felt was something I learned, and I'll keep learning as I do collaborative work with people.
Absolutely, and I think with collaboration like that is how the industry can continue to move forward with strong storytellers, with a point of view, with specificity, but ultimately creating a very collaborative environment. So obviously, the wealth of talented artists are able to contribute to these visions and expanding these stories as well. And with that, I would love to play our next clip.
The bestest smell.
Best.
Best smell.
Rose, they stole it again. Watchman! Watchman! देखो फिर कोई चुरा के ले गया मेरा रोज. तुम कैसा वॉचमैन है? हर टाइम सोता रहता है. Useless fellow.
Thank you. And I'm just going through all of the fantastic questions that keep coming in, which we'll get to in just a little bit. But thank you to all of our guests. Please keep sending those through. And you talked about you're an animation friend that you have who advised you and was a woman, which seems like that was important to you. And in this film, of course, you have very strong women characters that really carry the action of the movie. They not only advance the plot, but they are resourceful, they're imaginative, and they're really powerful representations of the role of women. And I would love to talk a little bit more about that, about the inspiration between that, the inspiration of creating strong female characters, and really giving them a voice in your stories. And if that's something that is important for you for all of your projects, and what role it had in Bombay Rose.
I think I don't do it very consciously. It comes very organically to me. The stories that inspire me, the stories that make me understand society in at a deeper level, and people and how they deal with it, are somehow always about women. And it's also that I'm surrounded by extremely strong, surviving, inspirational women. And I have to say it starts with my mother and my sisters and my family and my friends and the women animators that I've worked with. Also, a lot of men who are surprisingly extremely feminist. I mean, the studio, that paperboard studio that I work in, is run by 3 men, and yet they have in their past worked with 3 women directors, and that says something. There is an ease of working with a certain group of people. It happens so that your problems and the things that you're facing, it's very easy to be shared by other women because they're facing something similar, and the solution they come up with tends to be something that you can, again, very organically lay out. So I don't think I do it consciously. I don't think most women do it consciously. It happens because by nature, the things that you're doing, the things that you're struggling to bring together, there is a similarity. The problems, there is a similarity with the challenges that you face. And somewhere you don't have to talk about these things at all. And also, another thing is about 40% of the people who worked on Bombay Rose are women. And this was never done intentionally. This happened because somehow most of the people were the people that I chose to get into the team. They just happened to be women because you work with them, you spend some time, and then you realize these are, and it doesn't have to be pleasant also. With women, I realized it's not that I get along with all these women all the time, but I would love to work with them. Like with my mother and my sisters, we fight a lot. We always have a lot of things to say to each other. It's not all hunky-dory. It is a lot of stress, a lot of fight, a lot of give and take. And that somewhere unconsciously I'm drawn towards. And therefore the stories of the women, because this is what I see, this is what I notice, and this is what I want to then put down on paper. But Bombay Rose, if you see, is essentially also the story of Salim, who's a young boy, and his vulnerable masculinity. And that, I feel, also is something that women view very differently from a man's point of view. I could, even if I wanted to, I could not make strong male characters who are violent and into wars. And I've seen those characters, and I admire other people when they work with it. But if I tried to even touch it, it would be terrible. So I prefer to do things which I understand. And I think I understand women and cats and children much better than violent and I wouldn't say men, but the violent part of humanity. For me, even animals, men, women, children, everybody, as long as it's part of non-violence, they all come in the same group. And the politics, the system, that is the violence. That is the villain in my stories.
And that commitment to that authentic point of view is so important, and it's so interesting to hear how the makeup of the team, because it definitely seems the best really way to increase representation throughout it. It really starts with the leadership, and I think we all can agree that there needs to be more and more women in leadership in cinema in general, particularly in animation. And there's a great opportunity for that, for incredible filmmakers and storytellers like you, and the stories and that unique perspective and unique approach and experiences that you bring to the world with this medium. And kind of perfectly so, with Bombay Rose launching on Netflix around the world in 190 countries on March 8, but by no accident is also on International Women's Day, and really kind of a celebration of your story, you as a filmmaker, and strong, incredible women voices, and with that, what do you hope people take from the film, and how much progress have you witnessed yourself for women directors and artists, specifically within the animation industry? And how much do you think we still have left, and how can we, all the listeners, the studios, the buyers and producers, contribute to continuing to build the necessary kind of momentum and empowering more strong, passionate women with points of view to take leadership of the stories, and have more great filmmakers such as yourself?
I think it's looking very, very. I'm very optimistic. It's looking very, very positive. I think in the last 3 or 4 years, especially after the Me Too movement gave this a big push, the fact that representation needs to increase. Suddenly, you will see in the last 3 years, festivals have been working on this representation, certain festivals. And because I have more of a connection with festivals than commercial release, the percentage of women representations has increased, and they have done it in the two ways, which I feel in any kind of equalizing that you want to do between the genders, you need to do. One is where your selection committee onwards, you have more women, so that stories which are told by women become more interesting and reach the stage where they're selected to be seen by audience at large. So right from the selection committee to the jurors, your representation increases, and then you see the representation of women's stories increasing. So it's not like women's stories are being included simply because you need one woman out of the 7 filmmakers that you're going to have in your Critics Week. It is not so superficial. It has been done by these festivals very, very nicely. So when I was in Critics Week the first time in 2006, we were 2 women out of 7. When I was with Bombay Rose in Critics Week Venice, we were 3 out of 7, 40%. And Venice, of course, was criticized, the main festival, for having just 2 women directors out of 48 or 50 selections. But Critics Week, which is a sidebar, and Directors Fortnight had 40% women representation. So this is what I feel is still happening. The really mainstream and the really commercial ventures are hesitating to bring in that percentage of women, which is necessary. But the sidebars, the experimenting ones, the ones who are led more by principle and ideals than by their finances, are bringing the women in. And at some point, invariably, the twain shall meet. It shall go from just being sidebar to being mainstream. And all the efforts that just about every country in its filmmaking and its cinema is making, including India, in its small ways, I've seen in 3 years a big difference. And I think these efforts are lovely. These are sometimes really, really small efforts. Like, for example, in India, last 2 years back, they started a new rule out of the blue, which allowed working women to take 1 day off for their menstrual period in a working month, and they would be paid for it. So it would be 1 day paid leave that every woman can enjoy. And this law came and we all celebrated, and it went off, and not many people companies were mandated to have it. But Paperboat Studios, where I worked, I just found out that they had implemented this rule, and the women in my office were free to take 1 day off. And this means a lot because these girls are young. They're coming from really far off places. They're traveling in local trains where it is crowded, where just the fact of coming from where you are from home to your office space is tough, and you give them a point of relief. Now, this might not work in a first world European place, but it is needed and works in a crowded city like Bombay. So I think all these things, when they come together, it's only going to mean great, because if you see women as a species, they're much more of fighters than men are. So when few things change, they make the most of it, and that energy is very rampant. It is there right now, so it's working both ways. Opportunities are being created, and women are proving that they deserve these, and they should never stop. This should increase until a point where a parity is reached. And yes, Netflix is doing part of this with releasing the film on. So it's not a little thing. Every one of these gestures goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can all agree there's definitely progress, but there's a lot more that is definitely needed, and we're excited to contribute to that however we can, and definitely looking for more progress in that space and in the industry and in animation for sure. And just a little bit focusing on India as our last question before we open it up to the guest. India has one of the most rich cultures, particularly when it comes to storytelling in general, that's passed through generations. Cinema, obviously the success of Bollywood and beyond, and art as well. And the diversity that exists in the country is vast, right? It's kind of multiple countries, multiple cultures in one, across religions, languages, different landscapes that feel like completely parts of the world, that only enhances kind of the richness of that culture. In animation, obviously, India has a great foundation of service work, but it has also really been emerging in original storytelling as well. Can you speak a bit more on the opportunity that exists in India in animation, and particularly how animation can be a powerful tool to tell and really export local stories?
I have not worked too much in the commercial industry of animation, but I've been watching it from far. And I have always felt we have not put in enough effort, enough investment. The animation industry is really, really young compared to the live action industry in the rest of the country, including the regional, the non-Hindi, the non-Bollywood films. They have a long history, and they have come and arrived at where they have arrived. Whereas animation's history in India has been really from the 80s, bits of it in the 80s, and then 90s, and then the 2000s. So we are really very infantile in the stage of animation. How can we compete with Bollywood? How can we compete with that financing? So this extremely rich film cinema culture that we have actually works against animation. As a country, we make 900 films in a year, and we might make 1 or 2 films, or maybe 4 in a very good year in animation. So the percentage is actually about 0.05. The finances are huge. The time taken is huge. If it is not children's content, it's when you're competing with a crowd of so many films and you don't tick the boxes, it's very easy not to have an animation film get made. So we are, as a society, as an animation society, we are suffering from the fact that Bollywood is so big and they expect us to make that kind of money, which films time and again have proven they can't. We need support from the government, which was given to the live action industry in the 1960s and 70s to make socially aware films, and they were financed by the government. Nobody's doing that to animation anymore. The governments don't want to finance films which question or criticize the governments anymore. So in a changed scenario, it's difficult for us to match up. And that is probably never going to happen. What we need to do is then look at how Japan or Studio Ghibli has created its own audience and then made its films and catered to them, regardless of what is happening in the West. Now, this is creatively if you were to make Indian content. On the other hand, what we are doing is we are making a lot of money with the service we are providing for the films, and that should continue because that is what gives the young people jobs. That is what gives them experience. If these two things are done parallelly. I used to complain about this 5 years back, but now I'm seeing it happening. So I feel, again, optimistic that it is happening. A few a few more stories are coming. It is slow, it is long, we need patience, but then we are animators, we have lots of it. We have 2 lifetimes to wait till we start making Indian content where we can be on par with our live action, a very rich live action industry.
Yeah, we're very optimistic on our side about the opportunity of animation in India with original stories. One of our most successful children's animation around the world actually comes from India, based on an Indian IP, fully kind of created and produced by an Indian studio. And so I think with animation, there's a unique opportunity for travelability. Because I find dubbing over animation is so easy, and it's just a naturally kind of opens all worlds up into that culture in a really kind of universal way, and so really I think we definitely see that opportunity with the talent that exists and the rich storytelling and some of those definitely practices learned through service work. Can really be a great foundation to continue to build these stories for global audiences, and we definitely we see a huge opportunity ahead for original animation coming out of India. And before we open it up to questions from the audience, we have so many great ones. Would love to play our final clip, and then we'll spend a few minutes going through some of those questions. Fantastic. And just a reminder, everyone can watch that film on March 8 all around the world in 190 countries on International Women's Day on Netflix. And so with that, I would love to open up to questions we've been receiving from the guests. There's so many good ones here. We'll try to go through as many as we can. Thank you for all of those submissions. The first one I'd love to touch on, because it was one of the first things that really pulled me into this film, was the music. So we have a question about that from a guest saying, "So nice to see Indian animation in the 2D film. Our guest feels very proud to see that as a native Indian, and would love some light on how you approach the music for the film."
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question, Aram. I lost connection. Can you just rephrase?
Yeah, the first part was really a thank you from our guest. The person who asked this question is an Indian and felt very proud to see an Indian story in Bombay reflected in a beautiful 2D animated film, and was very similarly drawn to the music, just as I was, and inquired if you had a specific approach, if you could shed some light to your approach to the music and the sound design of the film, which is really gorgeous.
Yeah, music and sound design is something I work with my sound designer, PM Satish. He's probably the only other person who creatively gets to do just about as much as I do with the visual. I don't interfere in him at all. He's an absolute artist. We get along very well. And he just makes the sound happen on animation, because animation is very unlike live action. You give the film to the sound designer with just about nothing to create from, and he finds that very exciting. He's a national award-winning sound designer. And about music, what was funny was when I was making the animatics, and you are, when you make these still drawings and you need to weave them together and you need to edit, it's very difficult to edit without any sound or anything at all, in silence. So I didn't even have the rough voices. So I use music, and it would help me bring the rhythm into the animatics, regardless of what the film is finally going to be edited as. And when I was putting this animatic together, every part of it, for me, had a music playing in my head. So I would just steal that music from YouTube and put it on that piece. And that's how the film evolved, and this music stayed. And it came up and down, and then I arranged the music in such a way, and none of this music was created by me. It was all sourced from the music that I've grown up with, the music that I love, the music that works very well with a certain scene, the music that Pedro Almodovar has used in his film, because I love Pedro Almodovar. I want to pay a tribute to him. So my reasons were all kinds of artistic reasons of wanting to listen to this music when you're putting your film together. So I put all the music there, and then this animatics was presented to my producers, and we started making the film, saying we will deal with music later. But I was very clear that I didn't want a background score in the film. For me, Bombay is a very noisy place. You hear a music when you get into an elevator, you hear a music when you get into a rickshaw, you hear somebody else's music from their cell phone, you're in a park, somebody is playing some music. This was a feel I enjoy that. So to create that, I just used all this music, and finally, thankfully, my producers also fell in love with the music, and we bought all the rights of all this music and kept it the way my animatics had the music, because the visuals and the music over 2 years just merged very well with each other. So I also got a compliment from, because the question is from an Indian person, from an Indian composer, one of the greatest, A.R. Rahman, saying he loved the music and the sound of the film, and the fact that I was not resorting to background score, which could have been really very heavy. And to me, it felt really nice, because I think I was experimenting. Everybody, even my producers, were very scared. And then when we had this lovely silence in the entire film, which people say it's a very quiet and silent film in spite of being in Bombay. So music and sound was, I think, it could have as long a conversation as I have about my visuals, but I would rather get on to the other questions.
Absolutely, and definitely a compliment and a nod from AR is not to be taken lightly, but definitely can see why he would reach out with that, because it is very beautiful, and I think again speaks to a really huge contributing factor of why it was such kind of a very unique visceral experience and going through that journey with our characters. And we talked a little bit about the ability for animation to be such a global medium. And for us on Netflix, it's, we launch our originals all around the world on the same day. And in thinking about Bombay Rose and telling the story, were you explicitly thinking about an international audience? For example, the guest is asking, what parts of Bombay street culture you'd need to explain to an audience that might be unfamiliar, versus trusting that the universality of the story means that the audience will either get the context or not need as much context?
In a sense, it was conscious, because all my films have been internationally much more recognized than just in India. And when I do make a film, my journey is to reach out to the festivals that I will be going with to all my films, and to also reach out to the original Bombay audience. It's actually more difficult to win over an Indian audience than it is to win over an international audience for me, and I would say just for anybody. We are so critical of each other and at each other's necks all the time. So this was a challenge where I had done my short films where there was a universality, which is why it was working just about everywhere. But even with Printed Rainbow, I realized it was shortlisted for the Oscars. And it was also when I showed it in a little village in India, the kids would relate to it or the old people would relate to it. So for me, that became a very enticing way of pursuing my art. That somebody in the village who's not studied anything, forget cinema, can react to something, and another person who is a PhD in cinema, a critic, and then would like the film to be there. If I do not touch these two ends, then all that effort of making an animation film over the years does not really make sense. So I would say, just as I would want to reach out to people in the rest of the world, I would also want to reach out to people living in the slum in Bombay who would finally watch that film and say, yes, this is about us. And we don't feel like we are being looked upon or judged by somebody who doesn't understand us. So that is also kept very much intact, as well as the fact that if you're not an Indian, you've never been in Bombay, you would still understand the film at a certain level. Another bunch of people who live in Bombay understand it in another level. And there's a third bunch of people, older people, who know the stories that come from various places of migration, would understand it at an even more deeper level. So playing with these levels has always been my attempt at storytelling. It gets richer and richer. And that was also a critique of the film. There's too much packed into one film, is what everybody told me as a critic when it was shown in Venice. And the only thing I had to say was, I don't know if I can make another film. And I've been trying to make a film for a very long time. So it's like the Indian food thali, everything that is going to burn all your senses, but you have to eat it all together. That's what India is all about. That's what Bombay is all about. A hodgepodge, it's not going to let you wait and think, nothing. So somewhere I took that as a compliment also. I said, great, that's the thing about Bombay. Too much happening all at the same time. You can't get your bearings. You come out of a whirlwind tour. And I guess, I hope that's what the film does to people.
I love that, like kind of unapologetically. If you want authenticity, then that's what it is. And you've referenced throughout how much you've taken and you've learned from the shorts and how it's been received at festivals and the two films that you started and how many learnings came from that could then be applied to Bombay Rose, and this being kind of now the first film that you've completed and the debut final product. We have a question from the audience of, are there any learnings that you have now that you wish you knew when you started Bombay Rose that then you'll of course be carrying with you into future films?
There are so many. Where do I start and where do I end? That's it's again a day long of discussions. There are so many. And yet, if I was to point out to the one prominent one, which goes on to our earlier conversations, I don't want to do everything on my next film as I've done on this one, especially the writing. I feel I'm not as good at writing as I'm good at visualizing. And there are writers who are great at what they do. So I would definitely want a film that is written by someone else, written by someone better than me, written by somebody that I get along with, which is not too tough. And even in the other processes, in the next film, I would love to work with creatively with a lot more people than just me doing the same old thing. Otherwise, my journey would not, I would not grow with the next film. But that's my pursuit of growing. That's not really, I made a mistake and I should never make this mistake again. Those mistakes which you make and which you never want to make again, they're hardly things that you need to remember. Everybody knows this. But your takeaway essentially should be, which is the direction you need to follow and where can you hone your skills and where you can take the support of other people. And that is something I've learned and I want to value, that in the next one and the next, probably after that, it will be far more collaborative than this one.
That's exciting. And there's so many great questions, but also we've been talking about so many really, really interesting stuff. So unfortunately, we won't be able to get through all of them. But I do feel like it's important to ask one last one that actually came in from a few different guests. I've always found that, we're as good as our mentors. Any successful, talented person owes so much to a great mentor or somebody that's taken a chance on them or encouraged them very early on. And so reflecting back on your career, you've talked about, many great partnerships that you've had. but is there anyone or few mentors that really kind of stand out to you, that have kind of inspired you and helped shepherd you and helped you be the incredible filmmaker that you are today?
Absolutely, yes. Especially because I've just about learned everything by myself, not been formally educated. So yes, in animation, it was the Polish animator Jerzy Kucia, who, of course, Ram Mohan, who I worked with, is my teacher, and Ajit Rao, his protege, who taught us animation from where he was just back from Sheridan, and he brought the entire toolkit that was used there to teach us animation. I had some wonderful teachers who were just doing it for the sake of doing it because we were working there. So yes, Ram Mohan was definitely a mentor. Ajit Rao was another mentor. And one of my most important mentors was this Polish animator, Jerzy Kucia, who incidentally, his are the animation films that I watched when I was 21 and deciding between advertising and animation. And I never thought in my life I could ever meet him. But then he came back for the festival and he had a workshop and I met him. And I was so taken up by his work and I really wanted to learn under him. I went to Poland and continued the workshop, and my only desire was to work under him. And at that point, he told me, I see your talent, I see what you're pursuing, and you're too good to be working under me. You should be doing your own thing. And at that point, I felt, he's just being very polite and telling me, I can't take you on, and showing me other ways. And then later on in life, I realized he had told me such an important thing, a very valuable thing, saying, you are the kind who will lead, you are not the kind who can be led by someone else. And he was telling me this in not so many words, because then I would have argued against it. So he was one person who, with utter confidence, told me, you are going to go and make your own films. You don't need to work under me. Later on when I saw it, and I, of course, with all my films, I showed him the storyboard and I would take his, like virtually between Poland and India, just a few emails and things. But I owe a lot to him in terms of the way I went ahead with my filmmaking. My first film that I showed him, he looked at it and he said, it's a nice film, but it could have been made in any part of the world. It does not tell me anything about you or India. This was a short film called Orange. And I, of course, didn't like that at all. And then I thought about it. And that's where the crux of the entire thing is. The next film that I made, was about myself, where I come from and what I face. And such an important mentoring with just a few interactions that I had with him. He remains one of my biggest mentors. And of course, there is one more mentor. I've also been an actor in theater for a few years. And I have a mentor called Satyadev Dubey, who's not alive anymore. But all the acting that comes in Bombay Rose and comes from that. I do act. I do teach my animators to act. Acting is so very important, and he has been my guru in that. A lot of mentors.
Oh my God! With all the topics that we're covering today, I mean, there's this could be a series of panels and discussions. Talk more about music. Talk more about the influence of theater in your films. That's so great to hear. Such inspiring stories, particularly in the mentors that you've just pointed out, and the influence that it's had. And no doubt, I'm sure you've been a mentor on with this film to the fantastic crew that you've been working with, and certainly looking forward to you mentoring more voices, particularly the next wave of incredible women filmmakers that we're all excited to see. Thank you so much, Gitanjali, for taking the time and chatting with me today, and sharing your story about your career and your beliefs about animation and the opportunities, and of course, sharing so much about Bombay Rose. It's such a beautiful film. We can't wait for it to release. It's less than a month away, and I think this was incredible foundation to set for our guests. So encourage everybody to check it out on March 8th. And we know that you'll love it just as much as I did, as much as many of the folks that we've been speaking to have. So thank you so much, Gitanjali.
Thank you very much, Aram. It was so invigorating, so great. And yes, the questions from the audience we can go on and on forever. But yeah, it was one of the most exciting interviews I've done virtually since the past few months. Thank you, Maria Elena. And I really wish we could, I'm actually imagining the audience out there, and now it's like all these faces, these people who are listening, but I can't really see them. But lots of love to you all, and thank you for listening in and showing the enthusiasm, the great numbers that people have turned up with, and just Cecilia and everyone for playing the clips on time. And it's so wonderful when a bunch of women get together and make something happen. There's nothing that's going to fail. So yeah, it was great. Thank you very much. And okay. I'm going to say goodbye with Tish, my cat Kuruvi. He just happened to come in.